Though the teaching was like religion, but he didn't offer the religion. No, his reference to that original identity as being Muslim is regarding something that was prehistory, something that was with humans before history was recorded, something that is related to the symmetry and characteristics of the first human form and the first human perception of purpose, the original covenant between man and God. So the demand in the soul is to realize the share of this. What is the share owed to those who become conscious of this responsibility, of this weight? The share is leadership. The language of leadership for a troubled existence. A troubled world. A world whose economy is always in trouble. So, with that description, can you appreciate the importance of living in a place that has named or refers to itself as Newark? You don't have to, it's not necessary to burden yourself by the troubles in Newark. You're in a better position if you focus your attention on Newark and come back from that influence to speak to Newark. That's that higher spirit that is influencing your good or bad spirit in your private affairs. Newark is in the vision of the people that wanted to guarantee an existence and a society that favored and had mercy on the original human soul in its original human design, in its original human focus, in its original human purpose. Whoever it was that named Newark, they weren't calling it Newark, they were calling it Newark. It became Newark. It became Newark. But originally it was Newark. It was a perception of man's original design. And within that within that influence, formed a group that was associated with and belonged to the following of the teaching of the Nation of Islam. And it had a special character. I'm speaking to you because I'm here with you. I'm speaking personally to you because I'm here with you today. I'm speaking also to the audience that's seeing us, I'm speaking to them too. But I'm speaking to you all here in this important, special environment. Important, special, spiritual environment that is intended to shape a people for good in this world. The Nation of Islam teaching, as concentrated in the spirit of the people in this town, in this city, is supposed to support and carry a new life. That's the ark part. Noah. Noah's story is a discussion on a new world. New world order. That's what it's a discussion on. The old world died. New world lived. And the promise of that new world. And this town, because of the leaders associated with this city, I don't know about the present one, that has some far-reaching implications. Oh, who are you to be critiquing the leaders? I'm the leader of this community. That's who I am. said, well, who made you the leader? The need in the spirit. And what authorized that movement in your mind? What triggered it? I was told by the son of Elijah, Mohammed, in a setting that was very comfortable for him. I was told, and he didn't whisper it either. He said this to me in a regular tone of voice. He wanted me to hear him. He said, "You are a combination of me and my father." He said that to me when I was younger than most of you all in this room. In my early 20s, he told me that. Well, that's authorization enough, as far as I'm concerned. No one is going to pull me off of it. And when I recognize the spirit in our people that has been set apart by confusing and corrupting influences and threatens a kind of destruction, damage to our morality as a people. Something is summoned as a demand in the spirit to address it. And that process takes place beneath or outside of the common vision of the people often. Common vision of the people has been so disturbed, it can't register it, it can't see it, it can't appreciate it. It's a movement hidden. You know the story of the preservation of faith among the oppressed people, where a stubbornness to hold on to faith in God in light of or in view of or confronted by forces to oppress, still that spirit to keep that relationship lives, but it lives hidden. It's not discernible in public view. And we have seen such movements around the world. During the time of communism, for example, that was spoken into the ears of the world's populations, mainly coming from the Soviet Union. There were hundreds of millions of persons who had Islamic life and history, but had been dominated by the political idea of Marxism, communism. And when that idea got its material power and its military might, it imposed its life on those people for about 75 years. But when it had run its course, those people came out of it, from under it, honoring, embracing, loving, promoting their Islamic identity. And so now we see these former Soviet republics. We look at them in their public character and we see them as Islamic and wanting to be associated with Islam. And not just the Muslim republics or Muslim Islamic societies that were under the Soviet Republic or Soviet Union idea, but also Christian too. So the same kind of movement exists everywhere in the world. We see similar kinds of movements, and that same thing exists for us. Do you think that our people in this country, the Muslim community I'm speaking of, would not have similar kinds of periods where the leadership of our community lost its attachment to its responsibility, lost its vision, lost its connection to language, and began to oppress its own people? But still hidden under the surface is a movement in the soul of the people to restore themselves to that proper relationship, to that covenant. You think we're not going to, we haven't experienced such in small measure? We have. The period of time is a brief time, but in the life of a people like us, it's a long time. The period of time between 2008 and now, 15 years, in the context of the whole history of us as a people, 15% of our history is in that 15 years. That's significant. If our community is 100 years old, 15 years is 15%. So from the time that Imam W.D. Mohammed passed away until today, we have been in a serious situation, oppressed. An environment that has elevated confusion and has manifest a void in moral leadership, the voice of moral leadership, a void. Do you know that Imam W.D. Mohammed was of the most important and significant voices and leaders in this country in the years that he was working, living, preaching, representing us, leading, teaching? He was of the most significant and important voices in this world for what is the proper relationship between man and God. And to the extent that those who were associated with him in leadership abandoned that responsibility, then that responsibility has been weakened in the world. To suggest to a people that have such a special history that there is no movement in their leadership, that their leadership is cut off, that it has no expression in every age and in every time and in every moment of need, to suggest that to a people who have been formed with this special language environment and understand themselves to have a special purpose, to be told that your leadership is dead, your leadership has been buried. is to oppress. Now, you know, what I just was talking to you about just now, up until that point, is page one. Page one, I haven't even got to page, there's all these pages. Now I don't know if you'll be patient with me all this time. What time do you have to break the fast here? 7 something? 7:15? Well, I know there's time for preparation and all that. I won't keep you that long. I could though. Well, what all I have to say to you today, I could keep you that long. But I won't do that. I wouldn't do that. But I want to get to the important points here. I want to get to the important points. This community, our community of Muslims, was organized as a special entity to carry with it and upon it a perception of how to foster or steward good in the world. It was dedicated from its original organization, its original formation. It was dedicated for that purpose. Mr. Farad, he said, when observing or looking at the membership and just reflecting on it, thinking on it, and presenting his feelings about it to its following, he said, I look at you and I think of you as being the most beautiful people on the earth. He was talking to who? He was talking to his members, the membership of the Nation of Islam, as a reflection of whom? The lost found people in the wilderness of North America. This was his language. This is his teaching. His consideration of the people was that they were the most beautiful people. Meaning what? Is he speaking to their blackness? Is he speaking to their physical attractiveness? No. He's speaking to their moral character. And he is emphasizing the mission of those people to bring into the world what? Leadership for the constitution of the moral community, the most beautiful community, the most decent community, the most honorable community, the most productive community, the most respectful community. Respectful of what? Honorable toward what? Decent toward what? The honor that God conferred upon humans when he created them. To suggest to that people that they have no leadership, that their leadership has been buried, is a corruption. Whoever is carrying that message has been influenced by corruption. And whomever, let me make it even more clear to you. If you're listening to me now, and you're not moved to see this vision for our purpose as a people, And you can't appreciate forces that have influenced you to look upon this kind of teaching negatively, then you have been corrupted. Because what I'm offering you is a vision of what our relationship with God is supposed to be, according to what God has revealed and according to that which has formed us as a people, as a demand in us. A demand in us. A demand is something that is a strong, intense requirement. A people whose humanity was put in question and doubt. A people who had no proper relationship with their humanity by the workings of schemes against their humanity. And then come to a vision of the beauty of the human life. Come to a perception of that because of a set of specific and precise organizational teaching and principles. And then to tell that people that the purpose for which they have been formed is dead. You see that even in spite of that, there's still movement that God put in the soul originally. And when it hears language, a voice speaking to that dignity again, it perks up. It leans toward that voice. It leans toward that light. It strengthens in time, and it breaks the soil and declares itself. Isn't that what the plant does when it breaks the soil? It declares itself. There was a time, maybe not in Newark, but in the South, where black men and women couldn't drink from a water fountain that other people could drink from. And if it said white only above it, even if a bird shit in it, excuse my language, you still couldn't drink from it. So that black man and woman still buried under the lies that this world had imposed on them, given a new appreciation, a new picture, a new language of their worth that now comes to parallel with the teaching, the universal teaching of God's guidance, God's revelation. It parallels itself with that. It associates itself with that movement and that trajectory. Its characteristics having the same potent energy to influence the development of human life in the same measure that Mohammed the Prophet, that which is associated with his leadership. And that people, having that history, having that important value, told that their leadership is buried. Still, in spite of it. The soul in its expanse, God says that he inspires it to be discerning. He inspires it to know what will awaken it to its purpose. He inspires it to know what is good for it and what is not. In spite of these movements, in spite of these pressures, in spite of the darkness, still the soul moves according to the conditions and the characteristics that its Lord endowed it with. No system of government, no system of logic can separate it from the purpose that God intended for it to have once it is turned on to it. Once it recognizes the movement of this demand in it. No lies can burden it. It's important, and you must appreciate this, it's important to understand that when Imam W.D. Mohammed was buried, when his funeral took place, that it was not officiated by any of the leaders that were associated with him. You must appreciate the importance of that. That it was his a component of his leadership as an example or a picture for his following, that in the moment when our human life is reconciled to its purpose, and the ritual that governs and shapes our perception of that purpose, for which Muhammad the Prophet himself stood. Prophet Muhammad, he stood for the burial procession. And once he was with his companions and the procession came while they were assembled, and he stood. And they knew him not to stand for living people. And some of us, you know, we stand out of respect. It's no big deal. But Prophet Muhammad, in his teaching, he wanted us not to give so much attention to that kind of formality. But they saw him stand for this dead body. And his companions, they were sensitive to this, and they asked him about it. And he said that that body, the person in that body obeyed, the body obeyed that person. The body obeyed that person. In other words, what God has made is honorable. That which is in that body may not be. And God has put that body under the charge of that person. But the obligation on us is to recognize the purpose of that body. So what Imam W.D. Muhammad was saying to us, even at that conclusion of his physical life on this earth, is that those who are not respecting the purpose of that body cannot handle the purity of this one. They are not responding to the sanctity of your destiny as a people. And they can't be associated with the purity of this body. This physical body? No. This body of faith, this body of language, this body of influence, this body of thinking, this body that represents the body Christ. You know this language, the body Christ? If you understand it, you'll understand that it means, what it's referring to is that which is manifest in every human soul that God placed as a purpose on his creation, that is a reflection of the destiny of his will for that creation. Man functions, and the most important and supportive function in the life of man is the manifestation of God's will in his creation, in his human creation. And so the body Christ is a reference to that. It's a reference to a people that recognize, appreciate, welcome, and accept responsibility for the representation of God's guidance in the world. And we are people that were devoted in that way, dedicated in that way, by the original teacher of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the original teacher of the Nation of Islam idea. The whole people dedicated for the purpose of advancing God's purpose on the earth. You must see yourself in that picture. Stop looking at yourself only as the way that the Muslim world is characterized, or the way that Islam is characterized in the Muslim world. Don't see yourself in that picture. To speak honestly, we have to say that that picture has been corrupted because those persons representing that or giving language to that themselves have lost God's covenant. There's not anything that they can tell us about the quality of our human existence above what our teachers have told us. And most certainly, there's nothing that they're offering us, not in terms of teaching or spirituality or anything, that can move us to reclaim our social responsibility. Most of what they invite us to is just another form of slavery. Anytime you pick up another people's customs, another people's habits, another people's focus, another people's emphasis, you even pick up their way of dressing and accent in your voice, etc., etc., you ain't nothing but a modern slave. You don't have your own mind. You haven't declared your own freedom. You're not accepting responsibility for your own direction and your own progress. You haven't declared your own purpose. Instead of leaning toward the light that God provides for the universal man, you lean toward their light, which is darkness. I was in a discussion once on a radio program. And the host of the program, he was a very decent person. And he was very respectful of me, and he wanted that his audience respect me as well. And on the call was a person calling who representing the Mormon faith. And my interaction with the Mormons had always been, I would say, friendly. But this person was argumentative and confrontational. I didn't want to necessarily engage this person, but I'm a guest on this program, and the person wanted to criticize or critique Muslims in history and what he referred to as the violent nature of Islam. And so I didn't respond to him directly. And he said some other things that were distasteful to me and untruthful. So finally, I was in the studio with the host, and I made eye contact with the host, and just through the eye contact between myself and the host gave me permission to deal with this person. So I said to him, I said, you say that Jesus Christ appeared in ancient America. He said, yes, that's our teaching. I said, to whom did he appear? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, for you to have the report, he had to have appeared to someone, and they reported it. Who reported it? Who reported his appearance? Who were his students? Who were his companions? Who were his disciples in ancient America? I don't understand what you mean. I said, I think I'm being very clear. You say he appeared and he was associated with a population. What was that population? I said, was it the ancient people of America? What the people we call Native Americans? He said, well, possibly. I said, well, let me ask you a question. In the leadership of your church, are there any Native Americans? Click. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I didn't want to hurt the feelings of the Mormons. But the point is what? That if we're going to represent and say of ourselves that we represent God's guidance and the influence of God's guidance, then it has to manifest not just in our speech, but it has to manifest in our approach to the human life and the human family. It has to be reflected in our associations. It has to be reflected not just in our public language, but in our public relationships. It has to be reflected in our public spirit. What we advocate, this is what I'm talking about when I say spirit. What we advocate, what we live for, what we will guarantee with our lives, what we associate with, it must be reflected in that. If it is seen of us that we have not reconciled what our relationships are, how we treat one another, that the core understanding of respect for human life in its decency has not been established in us, it makes no difference what language we're talking. So if we see corruption in the Muslim world, in the leadership, where the leaders over Muslim societies are killing their own people, dominating their people, imposing their will on their people like gangsters, how are we to feel comfortable associating ourselves in our Islamic life with that vision? And when we see not quite the same thing, but a similar attitude, that if given material strength and given material support could grow into an oppressive force. If we see that in our own life, don't we have a demand in us to step away from that? And in Imam W.D. Muhammad's passing, he warned us in symbol that this group that is associated with me, I don't trust to handle the purity of this body of knowledge. Not only not handle it, not touch it. Even their witness is not trustworthy. Now, if you're not prepared in your soul to question this, to look carefully at this, and to not be fearful of it, to consider it, to ponder its significance in the context of what your soul is demanding of you. This life in these United States of America, this system that tells you when to wake and when to sleep, that tells you where to go, how to get there, what you should do with your money, how you should live your life. And it's not in any way or in very few ways respecting your free will. Ostensibly on the surface, it looks like it is, but because of the nature of this society, your goodness, your inherent goodness is always under attack. All the time, it's being threatened. Now, there's freedom for you to establish your goodness, and that's the beauty of this country. That's the beauty of this society. You can establish your goodness, but don't think that you're going to establish it without some very significant opposition. And that spirit of opposition has violated even, or breached even, the barriers or the walls of our own life and construction, our own constitution as a people. And you have to be honest about it. You have to have the strength to look at it, ponder it, and understand what to do about it. And what to do about it. Respond to your own best nature. That's what to do about it. Respond to your own demand for goodness. Respond to your own demand for responsibility. Respond to your own demand for representation. Representation of our life in the public spaces. We're not just to have a perception of our Muslim life that does not have the impact of good on this world. We're not to isolate ourselves in the mosque and just have a mosque life. God says that the whole earth is his mosque, which by implication means that everything that we do is considered an act of worship and devotion. If we are focused properly, if our spirit supports that. How long has that been? Long time, but good. All right. All right. Still on the first page, though. Still on the first page. The destiny for human life, the social destiny that God wants that we embrace as a responsibility is shaped by the way in which we value and appreciate our own humanity. If our picture of our humanity is distorted, then our expressions in the name of that will be distorted. If our perception of what Islam invites us to is borrowed and not pondered, is imposed and not deeply considered, then we have oppressed not only our individual human lives, but we have suppressed our potential as a force for good in this world. The new Africa demand on us. In the new Africa, what is that? This is language coming from Imam W.D. Mohammed. Language to describe a movement in our spirit to associate ourselves with every responsibility necessary to establish our social excellence in community. That is the new Africa demand. That is the new Africa vision. It's not just speaking to finance or business, although it's speaking directly to business. That there should be a new Africa business mind that wants to realize for itself everything that is good according to what God approves in the spirit of free enterprise America. Every single thing that any immigrant looking at America as a viable social environment in which to establish myself in every important measure, the new Africa demand spirit invites us to the same. With a recognition of what was lost, what was set upon, what was oppressed. It's a challenge even to the leaders on the African continent to be interested in, with an honorable interest, with an honorable human interest, to be interested in our development in the United States of America. It is an opportunity for us to have a relationship with the leaders of the African continent, should they come to an appreciation for their responsibility to see the necessity in renaming the continent. I'm telling you something very important here. This is latent in the teaching. Latent, meaning that it is not necessarily seen without some study. Imam W.D. Muhammad's reference to New Africa is also an invitation to the African continent and its leaders to think about that term and their own freedom from the lingering effects of colonial domination. But it's a wise reference, because the demand is not on them, it's on us. The new Africa spirit and demand is in us. It is to be realized in our activity. It is to be realized in our scholarship. It is to be realized in our establishments, educational, material, moral. It is to be a movement towards satisfying what our soul demanded in our earliest ancestor that was brought here on the slave ships coming from Africa to these shores. That there was something moving in our ancestors on those ships. A recognition that what was happening to them was not just and was not acceptable before God. And that they prayed, they begged God for an opportunity to fix it, to make it right, not just in the context of Africa or African civilization or African mind, but in the context of what God made when he made a human. That no, you can't take this innocent human creature. You can take the corrupt ones, but not this innocent one that has lived up to its responsibility in terms of its covenant with me. You can't take that one and I not put my spirit and purpose and focus and emphasis upon their soul and their mind, and in time, they will be a beacon for all human beings in the spirit of Muhammad the Prophet's leadership, in the spirit of Muhammad the Prophet's leadership. As an establishment in the modern world of Muhammad the Prophet's recognition of his devotion to God's will. And it's given in the Quran, and I'll conclude with this. It is given in the Quran that Prophet Muhammad saw at the distant frame or horizon that he would meet his Lord at the distant horizon, that it would be manifest to him, and that his vision of it would be certain vision, and that his appreciation for it would be certain appreciation, and his language of description would be precise, that it would register in him, in his example, in his demonstration of what God intended for man, that him in his focused spirit, not any spirit, not spirit to go here and there like the wind, but a focused and determined spirit to bring about certain conditions on this earth to favor the development of human community. And that spirit was as an arrow running parallel with God's will and purpose for man. Two arrows running parallel toward the destiny. That Muhammad the Prophet's spirit was perfectly aligned with God's will. As two arrows go into a common target, a common destination. In that recognition, in that context, in that spirit and focus, that is where we see and can appreciate the balance in the human soul, where the African American people, in recognition of what was lost to them in their humanity, in recognition of the characteristics of human life that God has reserved for those who accept a relationship with him and accept his purpose for them. The African American people having a language environment that produced a special mind sensitive to these characteristics, a special mind sensitive to the responsibility to speak words of moral leadership into the ears of world leaders from the morally self-purging environment of America, the confusing moral environment of America. Out of it comes clear moral vision. For what purpose? To satisfy the new Africa demand. The new Africa demand. The demand in us to realize for ourselves that which was lost in our transit from Africa to here. And in that spirit and context, in the spirit of the parallel movement of what God intends for humans and human beings aligning with that, in that spirit, in the tradition that began with Mr. W.D. Farrar, that was represented, defended, and advanced by his #1 student and his creation, Elijah Muhammad. And the incubator, womb environment that process produced, that brought forth the leadership of W. Dean Muhammad, so that the recognition, the universal life, the association with Muhammad the Prophet's demonstration of human excellence in this completed expression could be realized in a people who had been separated from their intended life. All of that process is in the context of the New Africa demand. And that is what we are to answer in Newark. That is the new expression of God's covenant, recognized in the responsibility, social responsibility of a people, recognizing and acknowledging the obligation and the weight of responsibility that comes with seeing Newark. Thank you very much. Peace. Assalamu alaikum.
Again, we say takbir. That is, God is greater. We thank our leader for that special teaching that he just shared with us today in this blessed month of Ramadan. Allah says in the Quran, it is not righteous, it is not a righteous act to enter houses from the back. Righteousness is to be pious and enter the houses from the front door. The whole time I'm listening to the Imam is coming through the front door of our intelligence, coming through the front door of our sensitivities. And that's something that we all are familiar with because it was cultivated by the son of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Imam W. Dean Muhammad. Allah also says, reverence the wombs that bore you, produced you for your purpose. And did we not hear that today? A reverence of the womb that bores, starting with Mr. W.D. Farrar, and his capable creation that Imam Earl Abdulmalik Mohammed described today, Elijah Muhammad, and the one who was born for the mission, Imam W.D. Muhammad. This is the month of deep reflection and thought. And what we would like to do today, before we conclude with our program, these envelopes, if you would like to see this special message delivered in the world, continue in the way that you've heard it today expressed, we ask that you put a generous donation here. Allah said, who will loan to Allah a beautiful loan? This work that we're doing is in representation of the message that Allah invited us to. Praise be to Allah. So you can give these envelopes to Elijah. Elijah, take these envelopes. Also, before we conclude, we would like to make the announcement about the Ramadan session that will take place April 14th and 15th in Washington, D.C., beginning with Jummah, with Imam Earl Abdulmalik Muhammad. For more information, go to MuslimAmericanMinistry.com to register for this must-attend 2-day event during the blessed month of Ramadan, continuing in the tradition of Imam W.D. Mohammed, what he started with us. Now I would like to conclude with Imam W.D. Muhammad's dua, his plea of purity and purpose. O Allah, we cannot manage this life for ourselves, not without you. Please make our life what you would want it to be, what you prefer it to be. Do not allow us to act on our own. Help us to act only in obedience to you. We hear you, we obey you, and we look to you, our Lord, for forgiveness. And to you is our destination. Ameen. Thank you.